I've said it before and I'll say it again. The internet is an amazing resource. Back in the day, we could never have imagined such a thing. It's also a mixed bag. It may have fun and dialogue and websites on every topic under the sun created by everyone and their sister. But there's also greed, stupidity, and corruption, mass delusions, and con artists shilling for the corporate beast. Bad actors are found all over the place, and this can be upsetting. But it's important to recognize them wherever they are. And adults should be able to look at everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, without getting all emotional about it. But let's start with quality content. In a society filled with corruption, it's important to celebrate decency and excellence. That includes the humble DIY videos, and these are great for several reasons. First, they're a business efficiency. You can save pounds of cash doing work that used to be hired out. They're also done by craftspeople from all walks of life, and it's nice to see how well balanced the public are. I actually have some experience with this. While working in call centers, I learned that about 25% of the population have either emotional problems or full-blown mental illness. And the phenomenon cuts across all demographics, young and old, black and white, rich and poor. It'd be interesting to know what factors produce that 25% of whack jobs in every social group. There's also the 75%. They're nice, often funny, rational, and emotionally mature. Listening to them is a delight and restores faith in society. With all of the crazies on tap and corruption in the business world, it's nice to see that the majority are so well adjusted. That brings us to the technical sites. They're done by hobbyists, college grads, and college professors, and all have specialized knowledge. There are the geography guys, urban planners, vegan chefs, history buffs, engineers, and on and on. They're also good for several reasons. They're emotionally mature. Unlike the mental patients, they don't have an axe to grind, and they haven't been overly brainwashed by corporate narratives. They're just trying to share the knowledge, which is an awesome thing in itself. Next are the civic commentators, and these break down into three categories: independents and partisans on the left and the right. Among the independents are comedians, college professors, and yet more regular people. My favorites include The Rogan, The Glenn Show, Coleman Hughes, and Trigonometry, and plenty of others. Of course, they have flaws. They allow people on from all over the spectrum, and normally that's a good thing. But the guests are sometimes dingbats, or they're propaganda agents on assignment from the corporate machine. Lying is their stock in trade, and the host usually doesn't recognize the grift and rarely calls it out. So it's important to look carefully at the guests and especially at their tactics. The whole range is beyond the scope of this video, but they each have a favorite technique. Here are some examples. Left-wingers feature nut job slogans dreamed up in the humanities department, but the abstractions are so tightly constructed that they usually pass without challenge. Jordan Peterson features generalities and grandiose proclamations. He frames his statements with qualifiers, and that leaves several ways to backpedal on everything. The result is a convoluted word salad, which leaves everyone dumbfounded. Ben Shapiro talks at light speed. He scatters the monologue with unprovable assumptions and bald-faced lies. They flash by unnoticed, possibly in the thousands. Watching these frauds go unchallenged can be very frustrating, and yet a few scammers in the mix is a small price to pay for a form outside of corporate control and the best civic discourse in the modern world. Corporations infiltrate every platform they can, and they've been on Wikipedia from day one. Thankfully, they can't control the entire site, and they probably wouldn't if they could. Wiki's autonomy gives it a cachet that other media don't have. But any topic that interferes with a corporate agenda is quickly brought into line with mainstream propaganda. The economics page is a prime example. It's filled with university jargon that has nothing to do with the real economy. This is an easy job because there's not much of a vetting process for Wikipedia editors, and corporate agents have no problem weaseling their way in. But again, the abundance of quality info on Wikipedia more than makes up for the zones of corruption. That brings us to partisans on the left, and they can be nice to hear. Their talk reflects liberal decency and common sense, but they veer off into the two-dimensional world. There, everything conservative is bad, and the irrational talking points of the university are in a constant loop. As a rule, the left just loves science, except when it interferes with their political agenda. Partisans on the right are another mixed bag. There are conservative scholars who often have useful and interesting information, but they circle back to corporate talking points or to the ever-loving partisan rant. For example, Thomas Sowell is an excellent scholar. He's especially good at explaining why societies fail and succeed. He gives decent advice to the African American community, he's generally a good influence on society, and it's a joy to get history and economics from outside of the university echo chamber. That is until he falls back into the mystical realm in which everything wrong in the world is the fault of those bastard liberals. Then there are the corporate patsies, and these come in a couple of variants. The most obnoxious are the hardcore culture warriors. They spend their days spitting venom at the far left. And there are the so-called moderates featured on corporate platforms. They include Douglas Murray and Piers Morgan, who has his very own website. They also focus on the left, but with a degree of gentility. And they leave out critical facts. For example, leftists are placed into positions of power by the same financial interests that run Fox News, employ Morgan and Company, and pull the strings on all sides of the political spectrum. This is the group to fear, rather than a bunch of amped-up ideologues. Of course, you won't hear a word about them from corporate spokesmen posing as objective observers. Next are addictive sites like Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and the rest. They pander to a public attention span that's now at shutter speed. They're basically useless because you can't say anything worthwhile in a few words or in a quick video. But they're not just a waste of time, they're actually designed to get people hooked. And we can't expect government to regulate them for a couple of reasons. First, they're profit centers for corporations, and corporations own and operate the federal government. Even worse, they include global interests with more sinister agendas. For example, TikTok is regulated in China to protect children from its addictive effects. But for some strange reason, it's not regulated in the US. Actually, the reason is not strange at all, and there are several of them. The CCP has had its hooks in American institutions since the globalist, anti-Western propaganda of the 1980s. That's accompanied these days by the toxic themes of Hollywood. The solution should be for parents to provide guidance, but that's not going to happen. They haven't lifted a finger to examine these platforms, and they're actually taking their kids to see the Barbie film. This is the same women good, men bad script that's been written over the last 10 years. And there's no knowing what kind of psychological damage all of these products are doing to young people. Facebook can also be addictive, so it's important to take it in moderation. And there are several pros and cons. For one thing, I prefer working-class candor to the drawing room manners taught in the university and which dominate the platform. Every word has to be sanitized, lest the social police grind you into hamburger. And yet, in this atomized world, being able to visit with friends and family is a great, great thing. Finally, we have light content, or as I like to call it, the shallow fest. But mindless trash is not all bad, and there's no reason to get all puritanical about it. The sites are done by writers and comedians who are good with style and content. For example, The Critical Drinker does film reviews with common sense, a writer's talent, and knowledge of dramatic composition. He really should branch out. He stays with action films, but there are other genres: dramas, comedies, and courtroom and detective stories. It would be nice to see the drinker's wit and wisdom brought to bear on these categories. There are sites about celebrities, comedians like Ryan George do silly and playful content, music experts explore it all, from pop to country to classical, contractors explain how to homestead off the grid, and Dr. Furman shows us all how to eat right. Everyone should get with that program immediately, if not sooner. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Social media is a friendly place for learning and conversation and just plain fun. But again, a lot of the net is disinformation, and that's a polite way of saying lies. They're scattered everywhere, but also placed in strategic locations. And thanks to cell technology, fraud has a wider range than ever before. In olden days, we had to sit by the television to see that much bull. Now it follows us everywhere and dominates people's lives more than TV ever did. As far as I can tell, there are two responses. First, it's important to separate the curds from the whey. That means being on the lookout for partisan dingbats, generic dingbats, corporate agents, and their smarmy talking points. I've given some examples here, and the whole range are explained in the book. I also demand that corporate propaganda be driven completely from the net, and I'm starting a crusade to do the job. It shall be completed sometime next week. It's also important not to get hooked on the platforms. The net may be fun and chatty and informative, but it's also toxic. And there are more important things in life than swiping left. Those include friends and family, conversation, civic projects, social outings, and personal interests. Living in the real world is healthier than online daydreaming. And the essential features of a responsible adult are discernment, moderation, and self-discipline. They're especially important when using the internet.